Today we're actually focusing on more than the top 10 weapons currently within Modern Warfare 2. I kind of want to give you a good snapshot, so if you're barely getting started, I'll make some recommendations on specific weapons, but also kind of what you need to look out for if you're trying to level up weapons specifically for Warzone 2. The first one will probably be the most detailed because there's a lot of things that carry over to the other attachments, and I'll kind of explain my thought process around that. These are more all-around weapon builds where I've kind of taken into account that you're going to use them for multiple situations. There's obviously builds that you can make more specifically for long range, for ground war or invasion, and then there's other ones that we can make them more rush heavy where they're only going to be for close range, so the recoil can be a little bit higher to get out of control. These ones are very balanced and should work for the vast majority of players regardless of your playstyle. Then you'll be able to make a slight tweak here and there to fit your playstyle even further. So with the M4, kind of what I'm focusing for with a lot of attachments is aim down sight speed not being too bad, and then overall recoil stabilization or vertical and horizontal recoil. And then on top of that, if there are free slots, then I can utilize those for attachments that don't really have any penalties. So for the muzzle, the stats that I'm generally looking for are muzzle flash, concealment, recoil stabilization, with the cons being aim down sight speed and aiming stability. If you do want to run a suppressor, because if a UAV is in the air, regardless if you have ghost, if your weapon is unsuppressed, you will pop up. The current suppressor that I probably recommend is going to be the one that has this pros and these cons. It'll have a different name depending on what weapon you're working with, but sound suppression, recoil smoothness, then with the only con of damage range, because then it's not going to hurt your aim down sight at all. So that's kind of a huge plus of this one, even though you do lose a little bit of damage range. And the next one would be something that has similar stats to the RF Crown 50, which is horizontal recoil control, vertical recoil control with an aim down sight penalty. So very similar to the first attachment. And then you kind of mix and match those, and I'll kind of show you how they look. And then the laser, you got a few different options. The one I'm using is very similar to the TAC laser that we had in Modern Warfare because it helps with aim down sight speed, aiming stability, sprint to fire speed. It's actually a little bit better than TAC laser in that regard. But the laser is visible. If you don't like the laser, you're gonna have to choose one that just helps your aim down sight speed, like this one here, so that laser is not visible. But it really depends on what attachments you have unlocked as well. But I would go for those ones, and that's kind of how that would build. I use an optic just because I like to have a little bit better sight picture. If there's certain guns that you prefer no optic, then you could just drop the attachment and then you're good to go there. Since the magazine does slow you down quite a bit, you just got to play a little bit slower, a little bit smarter, time your reloads, and then you can actually get a higher bullet velocity, which is what I have here. You do lose a little bit of damage range. Your bullets will actually go where you're aiming, and this is primarily for rifles and LMGs. And then the underbarrel, there's a few different options you can go. You can go with this one, which you can see the pros and the cons. But if you don't really want to impact that walking speed, you can always go with one which doesn't have any cons, which is the FSS Sharkin 90. And overall, I think you can get a little bit faster aim down sight by doing that. It just really depends on how you're going to be able to shoot the weapon. Then you go into firing range by holding triangle. It depends on what button layout you got. And then right here, you can kind of see how accurate you can be with the weapon. In this particular case, this target, the first one is at 10 meters, the second one is at 25 meters, and the third one is at 50 meters. For long range weapons, mid to long range, you should be able to shoot this target pretty easily, and this one here pretty easily as well. In terms of SMGs, you should be able to hit the first target and the second target relatively easy and be able to control the weapon and get those headshots or whatever the case is, get your reload in. And that's kind of how you would build out this particular weapon. But like I said, a lot of these things will carry over. The next one, in no particular order, I kind of just took a bunch of weapons so we could talk about a lot, is the Fennec. One of my favorite weapons currently within the game. Unfortunately, when you add a magazine on this thing, it gets really slow, and it can be almost too slow. But if you don't have the extra bullets, you might get caught reloading way more often because this thing burns through ammo very quickly. And then we have a few different things here, all very similar. You can see kind of what we're talking about, where they carry over for those specific attachments without the penalties. If you want to get rid of that, you can go to hipfire. If you want to focus on hipfire, still keep an optic. And then with some of the SMGs, you can actually go the aim walking speed route, and you will take a little bit of a penalty to recoil. And you kind of have to try both, because sometimes the recoil is too much and it ends up being like where you're going to actually cost shots. With this one, we want to focus on the first two targets, which you can see pretty much we can hit those targets pretty easily. The last one is a little bit trickier. Like you would be a little bit light on ammo to be able to hit a target like that, but these first two should be relatively easy to hit. If, for example, I wanted the better strafe speed, which we'll go ahead and check this out now, you can actually see this in action. So this is the normal strafe speed, which isn't horrible. It's actually a decent strafe speed. If we bump this up so we get the better strafe speed and all that stuff, you can see that it will be a little bit faster. It'll be noticeable. For some, it'll be unmanageable. They won't be able to make that adjustment, or they'll lead to more inconsistency. You just gotta kind of choose what works best for you. And that's why it's not really a one size fits all. If you feel like you want to use that extra attachment, there you go. There's a perfect slot for that. And then the Kastov 7.4U has always been in Call of Duty as an SMG, and they've actually categorized it correctly this time as an assault rifle. And right here, you can kind of see the build. I got the high velocity and kind of all built out, and it kind of makes it super easy when the attachments work that way. But like I said, you can change one or two here and kind of figure out what's going to work, especially when going here and hitting the targets. They're pretty easy to hit. The gun doesn't have a lot of recoil, especially with this type of build. And you kind of have a little bit of room to work with in terms of bullet velocity and all that stuff, because it is actually categorized as a rifle and not an SMG. The profile matches much more of a rifle than it does an SMG. And that's kind of how that one would work. The next one is Kastov 7.62. This is like the AMAX of Modern Warfare 2. Very good, a little bit slower fire rate, so it is a little bit more unforgiving. It's a higher skill because of that. But if you can be consistent with this thing, it doesn't have a ton of recoil, but just a little bit more than some of the other ones. You can be a monster with this thing. You kind of see how this one is built out. And then when we go into the game, we can actually control this one relatively easy. Like you can see, the fire rate is a little bit slower. It can get a little bit trickier at the longest ranges, but you'll kind of have to identify what ranges you're going to struggle at or not. But as long as you can be relatively consistent, you're going to be very good with this weapon because it does kill very fast. Next one is the Lachmann sub. We've had this as the MP5, and it is a very solid weapon. We all saw this in the beta. Obviously, you have to go through a couple steps to unlock it. You got to use the Lachmann 7.62 to get the Lachmann 5.56. to get the Lachmann sub, and then that's kind of how you unlock that particular set of attachments, and you kind of build it out in this way. We do have a spare one, so you can do the same thing we talked about earlier, but you can go with the no stock option. This will increase the recoil, as you can see, aiming, recoil control, and you will go ahead and show those both off so you can kind of see how those look. So here's like the normal, MP5. You come in here, you shoot your shots, or Lachmann sub. And this one's you're not really supposed to be able to hit those. It's at that range. The bullets get a little bit wonky with the bullet velocity, so it's harder to hit your target. But you can see, not a ton of recoil, pretty easy to control. And then when we go to put on that no stock attachment, we go there, boom. It should have more recoil. It should be harder. Yeah, you can see how it kicks a little bit more right there. It kicks a lot more, and you gotta see it. Look at the gun when it jumps up. It look, I'm aiming for the stomach and it shoots to the head. Like it goes way higher. So you just have to be aware of that. This could be used very well. You'll get better mobility, like in terms of movement, but you will have to know that your gun will be hard to take someone off a head glitch, which in Modern Warfare 2, let's just face it, a lot of the gunfights are head glitches, right? Next one I had a lot of fun with is the PDSW 528, and this is a very solid gun. I think it is a little bit slower, but it does come with better bullet velocity, and you can do a couple different things, but you've kind of seen the trends that we've talked about, so really you could build it out. However, it obviously does feel like it's an SMG. You're able to take out things at range, okay, up to about there. Then the farther one, it gets a little bit tricky. You can see the bullets it makes it clearly defined weapon classes when you're using them that there are clearly you're using an SMG and not a rifle. As you'll see once we get to the next gun, how big a difference it is for these targets, how little damage you're doing on this far target. I wish the firing range was a little bit better so you can actually see some of those things besides this one, which just shows a little bit of accuracy. But in reality, it's like, okay, we're 44% accurate. 40%, how does that kind of work, right? So that's kind of how you build that one out. Doesn't have a magazine thing, so you don't even got to worry about that one. And then that brings us to the RAAL MG. This one's gonna be the most dominant fully automatic weapon when Warzone 2 comes out if nothing changes. This currently within Modern Warfare 2 is always, no matter the difference from 0 to infinity, 2 to 3 shots to kill. It will kill you at any range pretty fast. It's super easy to use, doesn't have any recoil after the first 5 bullets. Its aim down sight is obviously an LMG, so it's a little bit slower. You can kind of see how that would build out there. But when we go in here and you notice a significant difference in damage when you utilize a weapon like this in the firing range, just because you're able to take out targets so quick. That was a total of 11 bullets fired, and we were able to take out all 3 targets. So at range, obviously, you're going to be able to hit targets and dominate them like we haven't seen with any of the other weapons. This thing, it just does not have a lot of recoil. It pretty much stays straight, and its damage output is very good. So you're going to be able to do dominant. If you haven't unlocked this thing, I would spend some time unlocking this, because this thing will just be way too powerful once the full Warzone 2 map drops. And just a reminder, if you're enjoying this type of content and you'd like to see more of it in the future, remember to hit the subscribe button if you want to be able to find your way back. Let's go ahead and get to the next one. So the next one is the SPR, which we've seen. You're going to die to one shot all the time. It's super forgiving, but in general, this is kind of a build you would use for it. Following the same fundamentals, we kind of want faster aim down sight, because the damage on this thing up to infinity, if you're getting headshots, you're going to get the one-shot kills. And even though in here it doesn't allow for your one-shot kills, even if you get a headshot, that's kind of how it works. You can see the aim down sight is pretty decent. And you can see the numbers on screen, kind of how that balances out. That brings us to the S2B, which was a very good gun, especially short to medium. I think a little bit longer ranges, it feels more like an SMG than a rifle, but everything beyond, like within about 40-ish meters, very solid, easy to control, and we're following the same fundamentals that we already talked about. And you kind of swap whatever makes the most sense if you want to use a different optic. So this one, you just line it up, doesn't have a ton of recoil. And there you go. Pretty straightforward build. You can kind of control the weapon pretty easily, and it deletes. It definitely deletes. And that's going to bring us to the TAC 56, which is very good. From the beta, I think it did get nerfed, but it's still pretty solid. This is what a lot of the pros are using currently. I think some of them will make adjustments as time goes on and they kind of feel out the meta and figure out which guns are better. But you can kind of see how this one's built out. Very similar to that we've already talked about. And this one's pretty straightforward, easy to control. Almost no recoil. Even at range, it does feel a little bit weaker at range, but in terms of recoil, bullet velocity, it's pretty easy to use this gun and to be able to shoot straight even at 50 meters. Next one up is the Vaznev 9K, and I don't really see a ton of weaknesses with it. Like as you can see here, I wish it did have a little bit better bullet velocity, but you can kind of see how that pans out. We do have that strafe stock on, so you can actually have the walking aiming speed, and I like that build with it. It still feels super manageable. The Vaznev ended up being one of my favorites. It has a very fast TTK, super easy to use, but at range it definitely gets noticeable that it is an SMG, so that is really its only weakness, is that it is an SMG, but what do you expect? The gun shoots pretty straight, easy to use, a little bit more unforgiving fire rate because it does fire slower, but it is a monster. And that's going to bring us to a couple honorable mentions. I included them just because I felt like I couldn't leave them off. There's so many good guns in this game, by the way, is the Lachmann 5.56. If you are struggling with recoil on any gun, this is the gun that you're going to want to use for long range. This thing will shoot straighter than pretty much everything we've seen so far, besides the RAAL. The RAAL is kind of in a class of its own, but this one still performs very well, and it feels a lot like a Growl in terms of recoil, almost non-existent. So when we go in here, we shoot straight, and you just beam at range that, like, it feels like you shouldn't be able to beam at when you're shooting targets. You know what I mean? You get those shots in, and it feels very good. The gun, probably by far the lowest recoil out of what we've seen, and this is kind of the build we perform in there. It does have a little bit slower TTK, but it makes up for it with a more reliable, consistent TTK, because you're not going to miss as many shots. And that brings us to the FSS Hurricane, which is a solid option. There's a lot of other great options too. I just want to kind of give you some of the best options to start off. If there's other ones that you think I should have included that didn't make the list, feel free to comment them down below with the class setup so other people can try those out. This build follows a similar thought process. You kind of see how we built it in there and kind of built it out, so you have all those options for this individual weapon. So I think overall, when Warzone 2 drops, this could be like a sniper support, especially since sniper rifles will probably be so dominant based off the bullet velocity, the one-shot head kill, and a lot of those other variables. I think you're going to want a gun that performs very well at medium to short ranges, and this gun does pretty well. It actually like doesn't perform like an SMG and doesn't perform all the way like a rifle. It's kind of that hybrid, which gives it a perfect candidate to be a sniper support when it comes to Warzone, like we've seen with some other SMGs in the past, where they just continue to do well, depending on how you want to use them, right? And that's more than a top 10. Appreciate all the support. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.